Here we are back in the Deerfield Ranch kitchen. I'm Robert Rex, and today we're going to do one of our favorite holiday treats at the winery, double-dipped chocolate truffles. They're easy to make. You can do this at home, and I'm going to show you how to do it. First, we start with the main ingredient, good dark chocolate. You can start with gourmet styles, Schaffenburger, Ghirardelli, easy to find. This is the bittersweet. You want to use bittersweet or dark, high cocoa content, dark chocolate. Today we're going to use 72% dark chocolate from Trader Joe's. It's a big bar. It'll make a lot of truffles. Cream, whipping cream, and butter. We're using sweet, unsalted butter. And finally the flavoring. We often use Deerfield Ranch Winery. Zinfandel goes great. The Deerfield Shiraz Cuvée, wonderful. You can use a traditional flavoring. Most common one's Grand Marnier. But today, we're going to use one of my favorites, Espresso. Espresso and chocolate go great together. You use my favorite coffee, Pete's. If you don't have access to Espresso, use one of the wine flavorings or Grand Marnier. Truffles are made in two parts. First is an inner ball of essentially a ganache, which is a mixture of chocolate, cream, butter, and flavoring. So the first thing we're going to do is chop up the chocolate. I've chopped up the chocolate. Now this is a recipe that's going to use 17.5 ounces of chocolate. But of course you probably won't use that much at home. You can find the recipe on our website, deerfieldranch.com, and I'll have it broken down into smaller amounts, so you can use one of the smaller bars, about 5 ounces for the insides, and then a couple bars for dipping. So there we have the chopped chocolate. It's chopped fairly fine. Next goes in the butter. This is sweet, non-salted butter. It uses 5.5 ounces. This will make about 100 truffles. Next we're going to add the cream. Chocolate, butter, cream, flavoring. It's whipping cream. We're going to bring it to a simmer on the stove and add it to the chocolate when it's warm. This is what will melt the chocolate. For this size recipe, it's a 1 3/4 cups of cream. This makes it a very light, creamy, almost liquidy inside to the truffles. Beautiful. You might be tempted to simmer this cream while you're cutting up the chocolate, but believe me, it'll boil over. It's not worth it. The thing to remember about chocolate is it's very sensitive to both temperature and working it. We want to melt it below 100 degrees. If you get it over about 120 degrees, it'll start to burn, or it'll get grainy, or it'll separate. Once it's burnt, it's over. You can't recover from that. You have to start over again. So we want to keep it under 100 degrees. We're going to do that with our instant read thermometer. I brought the cream to a simmer. I'm actually going to pour it in a bowl here to let it cool a little bit. Right now it's about 140 degrees. If we add it right now, it'll be a little bit too much of a shock. So it's a chance to have another sip of wine. Again, you can find not only the recipe but the wine at deerfieldranch.com. We've let the cream cool off just a little bit. It's still pretty warm, so we don't want to add it all at once. We want to add a little bit. Stir it around. Let it cool as we add it. We'll take its temperature. I'm always curious. It's about 86. We're going to let the heat from the cream do the work. This is where you have to be patient. You don't want to stir the chocolate vigorously or it'll granulate. So just let it sit there and melt. It'll melt all by itself. This whole process of melting the chocolate with this volume will take about 15 minutes, maybe 20 minutes. So take your time. Now you can see why it's important to cut the chocolate up into small pieces. You can also do the whole thing in the microwave. You can melt the chocolate in the microwave by itself at half power. You don't want to use full power, and do it 30 seconds at a time. It's a great way to melt chocolate. After every 30-second interval, you want to stir it a little bit. Remember, the chocolate will hold its form even when it's melted. So if you use like little wafers of chocolate, which you can buy for this purpose, they won't look like they're melted. But when you stir them, you find they will be. I find for adding this much cream to make this light a ganache, it's really best to let the cream do the melting rather than the microwave. I find it a little more fail-safe. Of tempered chocolates by 80 degrees. I'm not stirring this vigorously, I'm folding it. This has sat here about 5 minutes. It's down to 83 degrees. So we can speed it up a little bit. Here's where I use the microwave. I'll set it on half power and microwave it for 30 seconds. This will bring the temperature up to about 90. '87. We'll let this melt and we'll prep the espresso that we're going to use for flavoring. Again, you could use wine. My favorite is Zinfandel, but you can use port. You can use Grand Marnier. I often make them with Grand Marnier. Of course, that's a very traditional truffle. You can use a variety of flavors, all kinds of liqueurs, raspberry. But you know, great bottle of Deerfield wine, great for flavoring. You just put it in, and this particular recipe is a half a cup. But for this recipe, we're going to use espresso. We're going to make this really strong. This is going to be about 4 shots. Don't use dried coffee. If you don't have access to espresso, run down to Starbucks. Use one of the other flavorings. Half a cup, very strong espresso. You can see it's melting just fine. Still got some lumps on it. We want them all to go away. What you can't get here, of course, is the great smell. The coffee and the chocolate are a wonderful combination of aromas. Of course, you'll get this when you eat the chocolate truffle. I'm being very gentle with it. Of course, if you started with a smaller recipe of, 5 ounces of chocolate, this would be melted by now. Now we're adding the espresso, or the other flavoring, could be wine. I've let the espresso cool so it doesn't shock the chocolate. You see I'm folding the chocolate, I'm not stirring it vigorously. The perfect truffle is silky creamy, almost liquid on the inside, and hard chocolate on the outside. So for the coating, we're going to temper chocolate, and that's the next thing we're going to work on. Beautiful, silky, glistening. Now we're going to pour it out into this small cookie tray lined with a piece of parchment. The idea here is that we're going to cut this in little squares. The trick is you want to get them almost square, not really thin. So you want to use a pan that's relative to the amount of number of truffles you're making. This is going to go into the refrigerator until it sets. It'll take a couple hours, maybe 3 hours. This is one I made this morning. It's set up. We're going to mark it so we can cut it in squares. So we'll cut it first this way. Then we'll cut it this way. I've lined my pan. I put gloves on. I'm going to pick up the squares, punch in the corners, roll them in your hands. You got to be quick. The stuff is very soft. The gloves help insulate to a bit. They don't have to be perfectly round. These are handmade truffles, so they'll all be a little different size, a little different shape. The small recipe using 2 or 3 chocolate bars, 1 chocolate bar for the interior, will make about 24 truffles. Do you know why they're called truffles? Because the traditional ones, the ones that aren't dipped, they're rolled in cocoa, they kind of look like truffles, you know, the tuber that grows around oak trees, aromatic tuber. So they took on the name truffles. If the chocolate starts to get too soft when you're rolling it, you can put it back in the refrigerator for a few minutes, maybe 20 minutes, till it gets hard again. Yeah, I see you. Got to stop for another sip of Zinfandel. We rolled all the little balls. Now they're going to go back in the refrigerator to get hard so we can dip them. You can do this in stages, you know. You can make the balls one day, the innards, and then dip them the next day or several days. Keep them covered. They'll keep for a long time in the refrigerator.